Judge slams black man with sentence, but freezes when he reveals who he really is. He entered the courtroom expecting a routine day, papers in hand, his suit pressed, his mind sharpened by years of discipline and study. To most people in the room, he was just another black man sitting quietly at the defense table, waiting his turn. No one glanced twice at him. No one recognized the authority he carried or the years of service he had dedicated to protecting the law. To them, he looked ordinary, someone easy to dismiss, easy to judge. But within minutes, the air shifted. The judge presiding over the session, known for his stern tone and rigid views, looked down at him with an expression that carried more than legal weight. It carried bias. It carried a silent assumption. And before a word of explanation could be spoken, the judge slammed down a ruling so harsh, so cold, it stunned the courtroom into silence. The sentence handed down wasn't just excessive, it was humiliating, a punishment meant to make an example of him. Whispers spread through the audience. Some smirked, some shook their heads, but one detail, one critical truth, had not yet revealed itself. The man sitting there, quiet, composed, and seemingly powerless, wasn't who they thought he was. Because beneath the calm exterior, behind the sharp gaze that never faltered, was not a defendant. He was the very person the justice system relied on, the man trusted to prosecute high-level cases, to defend victims, and to uphold the law itself. He was the lead prosecutor for the district, and the very institution now trying to strip him of his dignity was built on his work. The judge didn't know it yet. The spectators didn't realize it either. But in moments, the truth would unravel. The gavel that had just fallen with finality would echo back in ways no one in that courtroom was prepared to face. What happens when the one presumed guilty turns out to be the very man the system depends on? And what will this revelation expose about the people sworn to deliver justice? This is not just his story. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the shocking moment a courtroom learned who was really on trial. Before the courtroom drama that would shake everyone present, his life followed a rhythm shaped by hard work, sacrifice, and resilience. His name was Marcus Ellis, a man who had carved out his place in a world that never made space for him willingly. Marcus grew up in a modest neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, but dreams were limitless for those bold enough to chase them. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse, often coming home with tired eyes, but an unshakable determination to see her son thrive. His father, a mechanic, taught him discipline and persistence, reminding him that every closed door could be pushed open with enough grit. From a young age, Marcus saw how differently justice was applied in his community. He watched friends get pulled over for simply walking home, neighbors fined for things overlooked in wealthier suburbs, and classmates suspended for minor infractions that others got away with. Those early lessons planted a fire in him, not of bitterness, but of purpose. He would not only study the law, he would live it, bend it toward fairness, and fight for those the system tried to silence. That fire carried him through late nights at law school, where he studied cases by day and worked small jobs by night. While others coasted through, Marcus pushed harder, knowing he had no safety net if he failed. When professors spoke about discrimination in legal systems, he didn't just hear theories, he heard echoes of lived experiences, faces of people he grew up with, stories buried in police reports and forgotten files. His excellence didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues respected his sharp mind, but it was his empathy that set him apart. Marcus wasn't the kind of prosecutor who saw people as statistics. He saw them as lives. He fought with precision, but also with humanity. Over the years, he earned a reputation as the district's lead prosecutor, the one called in for the toughest, most delicate cases. He had taken criminals off the streets, defended victims who had no one else, and upheld the very idea that justice must be blind, even when the world wasn't. But outside the courtroom, Marcus lived quietly. He wasn't flashy. He drove an older car, wore simple suits, and spent weekends helping at community centers. To strangers, he might have looked like just another man walking through the courthouse, halls. Nothing about him screamed power or prestige. That humility was both his strength and, on one fateful day, the reason he became a target of mistaken assumptions. The case began like any other. Marcus had paperwork to review and hearings to attend. The courtroom he entered wasn't even one he usually presided over. It was supposed to be a simple procedural check, something brief before the larger case unfolded. He wasn't there as a defendant, nor as someone awaiting judgment. But all it took was a misfiled document, a mistaken entry, and a judge too quick to assume. From the moment Marcus sat down at the wrong table, quietly, waiting for his name to be called, the atmosphere shifted. Some looked at him with dismissive curiosity. Others didn't notice him at all. But when the judge scanned the docket, his eyes hardened. The courtroom didn't see a seasoned prosecutor. They didn't see the man who had spent years serving the very law they all claimed to respect. They saw only what they wanted to see, and with that single assumption, Marcus's life was about to collide with a prejudice he had fought against his entire career. The same justice system he had defended would now turn its gaze on him, ready to strip away his dignity. The day had started as routine, but it was about to become the moment that exposed just how fragile justice can be when bias takes the gavel. The courtroom was buzzing with its usual rhythm, papers shuffling, attorneys whispering to their clients, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. Marcus Ellis sat patiently at the table, a folder neatly stacked before him, waiting for the hearing to move forward. To him, it was another day in the halls of justice. But to those who didn't know who he was, it looked very different. From the bench, the judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the docket. His gaze settled on Marcus, his expression tightening. Without even confirming Marcus's role in the case, the judge's tone shifted. Cold, dismissive. "Defendant, stand," the judge ordered. For a moment, Marcus thought the words were directed at someone else. He glanced around, but all eyes had turned toward him. The room grew still. A murmur spread through the gallery. Marcus rose, confused but composed, holding on to his professionalism. He opened his mouth to clarify, but the judge cut him off with sharp authority. "Name?" the judge demanded. "Marcus Ellis," he answered calmly, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had said his name in courtrooms countless times before. The judge frowned, flipping through the docket with irritation. "Ellis, you've been brought before this court too many times like others in your community. And now, here you are again. Late filings, repeat violations, and disrespect for the law. Do you think this courtroom is a place where you can waste our time?" A ripple of gasps moved across the spectators. Marcus felt his stomach twist. He had walked into courtrooms prepared for challenges, but not this. Not being mistaken for a defendant, not being condemned before he had a chance to speak. He straightened his back, ready to explain. But the judge pressed on, his voice rising. "Young man, I've seen too many like you come through here, entitled, careless believing rules don't apply. But let me assure you, in my courtroom, the law will be enforced." The words hit like blows. Marcus's entire career had been built on upholding the law, on defending it against those who bent it for personal gain. And now, the very system he had served was ready to brand him as another nameless face, guilty by assumption. Whispers filled the gallery. Some spectators shook their heads in quiet disbelief. Others leaned forward, waiting to see the spectacle unfold. To them, Marcus wasn't a prosecutor. He wasn't a man with years of service and sacrifice behind him. He was simply another black man standing in front of a bench. The judge continued, his gavel tapping for silence. "This court has no patience for repeat offenders. I'm prepared to hand down a sentence that will finally teach you respect." Marcus's jaw tightened. His hands clenched at his sides. Years of discipline urged him to remain calm, to not let anger betray him. Yet inside, a storm brewed. He wasn't just standing here for himself. He was standing here as a symbol of something bigger. The injustice faced by countless others who never had the chance to defend who they truly were. His mind flashed back to his law school days, to professors warning about systemic bias, to friends who had been stopped, searched, sentenced unfairly. He had dedicated his life to being on the other side of that equation, and now he was living it. The judge's words grew sharper. "You will not walk out of this courtroom today with a slap on the wrist. My ruling will reflect the seriousness of your actions. You will serve your time. Perhaps then you will understand accountability. Each sentence landed like a verdict etched into stone. Marcus could feel the weight of eyes on him, the gallery watching silently, the bailiff standing rigid by the door, the clerk scribbling notes without looking up. It was as if the entire room had already accepted the judge's version of who Marcus was. But Marcus knew the truth, and he knew something the judge didn't. He wasn't the accused. He was the one meant to prosecute this case. He was the one whose name was written at the top of the official files, whose authority had brought the case forward. Still, he held back. Years of experience told him to wait, to let the moment unfold before speaking. The judge was building towards something. Marcus could see it in his tone, his pacing, and then it came. "I hereby sentence you," the judge began, his voice booming as he prepared to deliver a punishment. The gavel raised high. The room fell silent. Marcus stood frozen, not in fear, but in a kind of stunned disbelief. The very system he had believed in was about to condemn him, without a shred of evidence, without so much as a question asked. It was injustice unfolding in real time. And in that split second, before the gavel could fall, the air thickened with tension. Everyone in the room braced for what came next, unaware that the truth was about to shatter the silence and leave the judge speechless. The judge's gavel hovered in the air, his words heavy with finality. The courtroom leaned forward as if the entire room had been pulled into the moment. "I hereby sentence you," he declared, his voice sharp with authority, dripping with the confidence of someone who believed. Their judgment was beyond question. Marcus stood motionless, the storm inside him raging but contained. Years of training, years of navigating hostile rooms and dismissive glances, told him not to flinch. Not yet. A murmur rose from the prosecution's table. One of Marcus's junior colleagues, seated nearby, shuffled through the case files, his face pale. He knew what the judge clearly didn't. Marcus wasn't the defendant. He was the one who had brought this case before the court, the one sworn to uphold justice. "Your Honor," the young colleague began, his voice hesitant. The judge slammed the gavel down, silencing him. "Do not interrupt my sentencing. This defendant has already wasted enough of the court's time." The gallery gasped, scandalized yet riveted. Some sat with jaws open, others leaned forward, eager to watch what they believed was justice unfolding. But Marcus knew this was no justice. This was prejudice wearing the robe of authority. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of quiet power. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he began, his tone calm but piercing through the tension. "I am not the defendant." The word struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. Silence, utter silence. The judge blinked, his gavel still raised midair. For a moment, he looked as if Marcus had spoken in a language he couldn't understand. His face tightened, his authority suddenly fragile. Marcus didn't waver. He reached forward and slid the folder across the table, the golden seal of the district attorney's office catching the light. His name was printed boldly at the top of the file, lead prosecutor Marcus Ellis. The bailiff leaned over, eyes darting between the file and Marcus. The clerk froze mid-scribble, her pen trembling in her hand. Even the spectators seemed to stop breathing. Marcus continued, his voice measured, but each word cutting deeper into the silence. "I am here on behalf of the state to prosecute this case. I prepared it. I filed it. I have served the law faithfully for years. And yet, before I was allowed a single word, you sentenced me." The judge's face drained of color. His lips parted as though to respond, but nothing came. His authority, absolute just moments ago, suddenly felt paper-thin, exposed under the weight of his mistake. The gavel lowered slowly, landing on the bench with a hollow thud. His hand trembled. He opened his mouth again, but the room had already shifted. No one looked at Marcus like a criminal now. They looked at him as something else entirely, a mirror held up to a system that claimed to be blind, but had shown its eyes all too clearly. Marcus's voice grew firmer, echoing in the chamber. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't check the docket. You didn't even confirm my role. You saw a black man standing before you, and that was enough for judgment." The gallery stirred, the weight of the words pressing down on every ear. Phones were discreetly raised, cameras catching the moment. The image of a judge, frozen in silence while a black prosecutor revealed the truth would not stay. confined to this courtroom for long. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his robe suddenly feeling heavy. His authority, so commanding moments ago, now seemed fragile, clinging by a thread. He glanced down at the file in front of him. Marcus's name staring back like an accusation carved in bold ink. The judge stammered, his voice low, cracking. But he had no defense. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in that courtroom, the balance of power had shifted, not because of a robe, not because of a gavel, but because the truth had been spoken aloud. The illusion of fairness had shattered, and in the wreckage, every spectator saw what Marcus had known all along. Justice was not blind. The judge's gavel rested idle. His authority hung suspended in the air, waiting for words that never came. And Marcus, still calm, still composed, stood taller than ever. His very presence the living contradiction to the injustice that had almost silenced him. The moment stretched, etched into memory, impossible to erase. The judge had sentenced him before hearing him. But now it was the judge who stood sentenced by his own silence. The silence in the courtroom lingered, thick and unrelenting. It was as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to break it. But no one dared. Not the bailiff. Not the clerk. Not even the gallery, who moments ago had leaned forward with hungry fascination. Now all eyes were fixed on one man, Marcus. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to wave his hands or make a scene. His presence alone had shifted the balance of power. And in that shift, the judge, the man draped in the robe of ultimate authority, sat motionless, swallowed by his own silence. Marcus straightened the folder, sliding it back into his briefcase with deliberate calm. Every click of the metal clasp echoed like a hammer, striking truth into the marble floors. He turned to face the courtroom, his gaze steady. He wasn't speaking to the judge anymore. He was speaking to the system. This, Marcus said slowly, his tone controlled but searing, is the cost of assumptions. This is what happens when justice isn't blind but biased, when the robe of authority becomes a mask for prejudice. His words hung in the air, undeniable. The gallery erupted, not with laughter or mockery, but with the uneasy rustle of realization. Phones were already recording, capturing every word, every second. What had begun as another routine court session was now history in the making. The judge shifted, trying to regain control. "Order in the court," he murmured, but his voice cracked. It lacked the booming authority that once commanded obedience. Marcus turned toward him, eyes unwavering. "Order, Your Honor, is built on truth. And today you showed us how quickly truth can be silenced, if not challenged." The gavel lay idle. The robe weighed heavy. And for the first time in his career, the judge had nothing to say. That night, the video spread like wildfire. Across social media feeds, headlines exploded. Judge silenced, after mistaking black prosecutor for defendant. Systemic bias exposed in courtroom showdown. Lead prosecutor schools judge in viral moment. Millions watched as Marcus calmly revealed his role. As the judge's face drained of color, as the very symbol of authority crumbled into silence. Some viewers were outraged, their anger spilling into comment sections and forums. Others, however, claimed it was an isolated mistake, an overreaction, or misunderstood. But Marcus knew better. This was no mistake. This was a mirror. And it reflected a reality far too familiar for men who looked like him. For Marcus, the incident didn't end with that courtroom. It followed him into the streets, into whispered conversations at grocery stores, into the tense hush that fell when he walked into meetings where others didn't know what to say. Strangers recognized him now, not as the lead prosecutor, but as the man in that video. Colleagues congratulated him, slapped his back, told him he was making history. But beneath the praise, Marcus carried the weight of what the moment truly meant. He hadn't asked to be history. He had simply asked to be seen for who he was. And still, he wasn't sure if the world was ready to see. The judge, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure. Petitions circled online demanding accountability. Civil rights groups called for investigation. Commentators debated on television whether he should step down. But for Marcus, the consequences for the judge mattered less than the lesson for everyone watching. This was never just about one courtroom. This was about every courtroom, every office, every traffic stop, Every sidewalk encounter where someone was judged not by their character, not by their credentials, but by the color of their skin. It was about how quickly a black man, even one wearing a suit, even one holding the title of lead prosecutor, could be mistaken for a criminal, and how deeply that mistake revealed the truth about justice in America. Weeks later, Marcus stood outside the courthouse again, the steps now crowded with reporters. Microphones reached for his words, cameras flashed, questions shouted over one another. He raised his hand and the crowd stilled. His voice, calm yet commanding, carried over the noise. What happened that day wasn't about me alone. It was about a system too comfortable with assumptions, too quick to judge, too willing to silence those who don't fit its mold. I don't share this story because I want sympathy. I share it because it keeps happening, to men, to women, to children. And too often they don't get the chance to speak up. Too often they don't walk away. He paused, his words hanging heavy. The cameras clicked. The reporters scribbled. But Marcus wasn't speaking for them. He was speaking for the millions who never stood behind a microphone, who never had their truth recorded on a phone, who never made headlines. The question isn't what happened to me, Marcus continued. The question is, how many more times will this happen before we finally say, enough? The crowd erupted not with chaos, but with applause, with conviction, with the sound of something shifting. Marcus turned and walked down the courthouse steps. Not as a defendant, not just as a prosecutor, but as a man who had shown the world a truth it could no longer unsee. And so, the judge's silence that day became louder than any sentence he had ever delivered. Because in his silence, the world heard what Marcus had always known. Justice without accountability is just another word. And until we confront the bias within the system, no robe, no gavel, and no courtroom can ever claim to truly hold it.